Hello, welcome to the City of Hoboken's community meeting. It's Wednesday, March 29th, meeting scheduled for 6 p.m. We're here for a presentation and discussion regarding the City of Hoboken's housing element and fair share plan. The plan is a required element of the city's master plan, and it will provide for future affordable housing rehabilitation and rental assistance programs through the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us here today, or for those of you who are watching this after it has been taped, where it will be hosted on the city's website. And I think Director Brown may be able to give a little more specifics about when and where we can find that. We're here today with the Community Development Director, Chris Brown, and we're also going to, and also Casey Wolf, who's also in the office with Director Brown, is here as well. We're going to be hearing from Kendra Lely. Kendra is the city's affordable housing planner, and she works with Kyle and McManus Associates. Kendra will be presenting a presentation similar to one that she gave to the planning board that was given at one of their meetings, and also at the Community Development Committee, which I chair, where she made a presentation at our last committee meeting. I think it was about a week ago that we heard from you, Kendra. And then after hearing Kendra's presentation, which will tell you a little bit about the affordable housing fair share plan that we have, this is part of a process that is required for the city of Hoboken to get approval from the New Jersey Supreme Court as part of a declaratory judgment action that is pending in court involving fair share housing. So this is one of the steps that is necessary as part of the process, but we're hoping that it will be a meaningful step and one where people can understand better what it is the city is planning to do in this regard. And part of the way that we were hoping that we will help educate the public about this is to have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of Kendra's presentation, so that if there are any questions that will be had after the presentation, you're welcome to ask them, and Kendra will be able to answer them live, or Director Brown or Casey or whomever else would be the best person to answer the questions that you may have. So with that, Director, I think I would turn it over to Kendra and have her make her presentation today.
Sounds good. Thank you, Councilman. Kendra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen and hope that it works. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay. There we go. Oh, I don't want that part. Do you all see my notes, or do you just see the
I see the notes as well as the main.
Okay. It didn't happen before. Of course it didn't happen before.
Maybe that swap presenter slide view is the magic.
Maybe you're right.
That looked
Go. Thank you so much for that.
That looked promising. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kendra Lely. I am a professional planner in the state of New Jersey, and have been fortunate enough to be the affordable housing planner for the city. Just a quick overview of my background. I have been practicing planning in the state of New Jersey, and have been licensed for almost 28 years now. I've been doing affordable housing planning as a big component of the practice I do, probably for about the same amount of time, maybe 20, 25 years. And I've represented many municipalities in putting together their housing element and fair share plan. I'm also have been named a master in many of the courts to review housing elements and fair share plans for the court system. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm going to get moving on to the housing element and fair share plan. Councilman Cohen was great. He was able to kind of give an overview. I may repeat a couple of things, but I wanted to make sure that we have a comprehensive review of the housing element and fair share plan for this webinar. So the items that I'm going to cover include the housing plan elements, meaning what goes into a housing element plan, the historical context of affordable housing in New Jersey. It is voluminous, so we're going to just hit the highlights. What the obligation is, meaning what is the affordable housing obligation and how it is being satisfied in the fair share plan. Who qualifies for affordable housing, and what are the rents that would be associated with those incomes that for the folks that would qualify for affordable housing? We're going to talk a little bit about the spending plan, meaning that there's funds available that go towards affordable housing from the city, and then what the next steps are, the approval process. So this is a slide of a housing plan. It is a required element of the master plan. So the city has a master plan that has a land use element. It has various other elements. The housing plan, or the housing element, was originally adopted back in 2005. This is an amendment to that housing plan. These are the components that are required by municipal land use law to be included in the housing plan. The plan that is before the planning board in February includes all these elements. The planning board did approve the housing element and fair share plan. That is the entity that is responsible for approving the housing element and fair share plan. The governing body, city council, will do something called endorsement of the plan in order for it to be submitted to the court system. But generally, these are the pieces that go into the housing plan. Generally, it's the housing demographic analysis and employment analysis, knowing what our obligation is, putting together the plan to satisfy that obligation. And then there are other items that I would call potentially more administrative, but really looking at the trust fund, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which I'll talk about, the spending plan, all the ordinances that are required. All of this information goes into the housing plan and then is submitted to the court. So for historical context, it's almost been 50 years since Mount Laurel 1 was decided, and you will hear affordable housing interchanged with Mount Laurel. And the reason that is because in 1975, a case was brought to the Supreme Court where Mount Laurel Township in South Jersey they indicated, or they were sued because they had what was known as exclusionary zoning, meaning that there weren't any zones within that municipality that allowed for anything other than single family detached dwelling units. And so they were sued for exclusionary zoning, and the Supreme Court found in 1975 that they were excluding affordable housing options or opportunities through their general zoning. And so the finding of that was that, and this is probably one of the most important pieces of this particular slide, is that every municipality in the state of New Jersey has a constitutional obligation to provide for affordable housing. So that's what's known as Mount Laurel 1, which really kind of created the base for the last 48 years of affordable housing and the many different regulations that we've been under. In 1983, Mount Laurel 2 was decided, and this was really as a reaction to the fact that while the Supreme Court said you have an obligation, there was a lot of chaos. Not a lot of people knew what that meant. What is our obligation? How do we satisfy it? Who is an entity that's going to review it and indicate that we actually have satisfied the obligation? So in 1983, the Supreme Court required the creation of municipal obligations. And in that particular case, there was court review, kind of similar to what we're doing right now. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in a second. But the Superior Court system approves the housing plans by municipalities that chose to submit them to the court system at that time. It took about 2 years to figure out that there was not a great system in place. And so the Fair Housing Act was passed by the legislature, which created something known as COA, and that's an acronym for the Council on Affordable Housing. It was an administrative agency out of the state of New Jersey, and they were created to administrate the Fair Housing Act. Their requirements, basically, their charge was twofold. One was to create rules and regulations for municipalities to abide by and be able to get certification of their plans. The other was to create their obligations, to basically provide the obligations for each of the municipalities. So that's kind of the first part of the historical context. The second part is what I call the third round history, but this really then goes, okay, once COA was established, they did come up with what's known as prior round or second round rules. That really moved forward. Some municipalities were adopting housing plans, showing how they were going to meet the obligation. The sticky wicket came when around 2004, there was another round of rules that needed to be adopted. The rules were really for a 10-year increment. So in 2004, the third round rules were proposed and actually adopted twice. They were based on something known as growth share, which really just means as a municipality grows, there was a requirement for affordable housing. So that more residential, there would be a requirement for affordable housing. More non-residential, there'd be a requirement for affordable housing. This growth share was controversial. Again, they were adopted twice, those rules, and overturned twice. In 2013, and that was a good about 10-year period of time where most municipalities were adopting plans. The rules were overturned. They'd be readopted. We'd put a new plan out. They'd be overturned again, and then finally in 2013, the Supreme Court. This growth share methodology was brought up to the Supreme Court. They invalidated that third round kind of growth share methodology, and COA was required to adopt new rules. It took them about a year to get through rules. They failed to adopt those rules in 2014. In that same year, an organization known as Fair Share Housing Center, you're going to hear me talk about that a little bit. They are an advocacy group for the low and moderate income households of New Jersey. They file a motion to compel the state to adopt the rules. And in 2015, when those rules are not adopted, basically the Supreme Court is in something known as Mount Laurel Force, transfers the approval of all housing plans to the courts, to Superior Court. And that's kind of where we are today. It's a quick review of history. I'll be happy to kind of talk through other questions you may have. There are multiple other case law as well as state agency actions that we could probably spend 3 hours talking about. So, just to kind of give you the highlights, but that brings us to kind of post 2015. And up to this point. So pre-2015, as I indicated, the Council on Affordable Housing, it was an administrative process, and municipalities received something known as substance certification. You submitted your plan through COA, and it went through an administrative review and process. That was up until the point where Supreme Court said, COA, you're no longer doing your job correctly, and it's going to go back to the Superior Court system. So post 2015, since that decision, it is now a legal process because municipalities have to file something called a declaratory judgment action, meaning that they want protection from the court, that they are not going to be found to not provide a realistic opportunity. And in 2015, that was really a protection to allow for municipalities to, one, understand what their obligation is, and two, put together a plan to submit to the court. So there was a legal process that the municipality went in, said we would like protection. We're going to put a plan together. At that point, when Supreme Court had indicated that it's going back to Superior Court for review and approval, Fair Share Housing Center was named as overall throughout all municipalities an interested or intervening status, meaning that they were a party, or if they chose to, a party to all the affordable housing plans in the state of New Jersey. And typically and for the most part, it would require a settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing as the advocacy group for the low and moderate income households. They were representing them, and we would, as a municipality, join together and we would come up with a housing plan that they were satisfied with, that met the rules and regulations. The one thing I do want to mention is COA did not necessarily, their administrative review went away, but the COA rules and regulations, what's known as the second round regulations, they stayed put. So we still are under what's COA is considered to be COA regulations, even though they're not necessarily reviewing the plans. But what we get now is, instead of substantive certification, it's something called a judgment of repose and compliance. That comes from the court system. And we have submitted we being the city has submitted their plan to the court. That was back in December. We have what's known as a conditional judgment of repose currently. And part of the requirements of that judgment of repose is that we, as Councilman had indicated, we go through planning board approval. We have a public review of it. The governing body approves it, and then we submit certain that information back to the court. There were certain conditions that we had to meet. So our obligation, I talked about an obligation quite a bit. The city's obligation is 252 rehabilitation. And I'm not going to get into the major details, but the obligation is actually broken into three components: a rehab obligation, and a new construction obligation. The new construction obligation is broken up into prior round requirements or obligation and third round obligation. And that's just the prior round covers a certain period of time, and the third round covers a certain period of time. Because the city is an urban aid municipality, they do not have a new construction obligation. So the only obligation that the city is required to meet is the rehab obligation. And in these two boxes, you will see the methods in which we put together in our plan, and has been obviously approved conditionally by the court. One is through a rehab program, which I'm going to talk about. And then the other mechanisms that we are proposing and will be approved for is new construction, meaning the inclusionary housing that's been approved, potentially that's already been constructed, as well as proposed in the future. And we'll talk through that. And then something also known as a mandatory set-aside ordinance, and we'll get through that as well. So these are three components or three mechanisms to address that 252 rehab obligation. So the rehab program, also known as the home improvement, the title of it is the home improvement program. This program is in the form of a manual, and that manual will be approved by the governing body in the near future. But basically, you receive credit for several things that the municipality does for existing units, either owner occupied or rental units. If there is a repair of a major system, and that major system could be a plumbing system, electrical, structural, could be a roof, there's a whole host of them. And in that home improvement manual, it goes through what those major systems are. But basically, if there's a repair of a major system, the existing unit has a low and moderate income household living in it, there is a $10,000 minimum subsidy required to help the repair of that major system. It's a no interest loan for that period of the 10 years. It does require a 10-year affordability control, or what's known as a deed restriction. So for those 10 years, after that system gets improved, then there is a requirement that low and moderate income household must be in that particular unit in order for that to be a credit. The city has, in their spending plan, has shown that they are going to be putting $600,000 towards this program over the next couple of years. The period of our obligation will end in July of 2025, and then there will be another obligation, which would be known as the fourth round, occurring after July 2025. So we anticipate 20 to 30 units over the next couple of years, and that's about 20,000. We think an average per unit to improve those units. So that's really the impetus, not impetus, but that's the basic overview of the home improvement program. As I said, we have a draft manual. It will be approved, I believe, next month by the governing body. The implementation of this program really is meant to remedy housing code issues, maintenance code issues, certainly to conserve energy and for sustainability. And more importantly, to remove any health or safety hazards in the low and moderate income units. And it is a first come, first serve program unless there's an emergency situation that's identified. So that gives you a quick overview of the rehabilitation program. As I indicated, the other mechanism that is being shown or proposed and approved in the housing element and fair share plan is the inclusionary housing that has and will take place in the city. That includes existing units, approved units, and proposed units. And you'll see the outline here that it's a mathematical equation. There's 252 units as a requirement for the rehab obligation. There are 159 existing units within the city, meaning they're occupied currently. They have deed restrictions and affordability controls on them. There are 273 units that have been approved over the last many years, and probably in different forms of getting to construction, and then 179 units that are proposed, mostly through redevelopment agreements at this point. So that totals 611 units that we are proposing and will be approved for application against the 252 unit obligation. That gives a surplus of 359 units. What's important to know here is that the 359 units could and will go towards a fourth round obligation. There will be another obligation starting in July of 2025. And so the intention here is that any surplus units will continue to go towards any future obligation. I'm going to go through this somewhat quickly. The housing element fair share plan lists a whole litany of projects. This is just a quick overview. I know that the map is pretty small on the left side of this slide. There's a full-size map in the housing element fair share plan that you'd probably be able to see a bit better. But basically, this map is, it's a graphic display of where the existing units are, approved units, and the proposed units in the city. But to give you a sense of, these are the existing projects that are occupied currently, and you can see them listed out here. There are many projects, as was indicated before, that already exist and have the affordability controls and have low and moderate income households living in them. This is a listing of the approved projects. There are many approved projects, as you can see here, and they've been approved over the past many years, not necessarily quite there for construction. Some of them are under construction, and some are going through the approval process with the city for building permits and other outside agency permits. And then these are proposed projects, meaning that they have, as I indicated, gone through a redevelopment agreement process, not necessarily all the way through planning board approval, but these would be proposed projects coming down the pike and potentially before the planning board within the near future. So those were the inclusion, what's known as inclusionary projects. And I'm going to back up for a second. What I mean by inclusionary projects is that about 80 to 90% of the number of units that are being proposed are market rate. 10 to 20%, and it depends. There is a requirement that a minimum of 10% be set aside for affordable housing. So the units that you see on these slides represent the affordable housing units that are being proposed with the inclusionary projects. So those inclusionary projects are a mix between market and affordable. There are a few that are considered to be 100% affordable housing projects, and that's exactly what it means, is that 100% of the units are affordable to low and moderate income households. The difference being is that most of the time you need outside funding and funding from the city to help with funding that project, because in an inclusionary project or an inclusionary development, the market rate units really subsidize the low and moderate income households. In a 100% job, that's not necessarily the case. There are no market rate units to subsidize, and therefore funding sources are needed, and it can come from federal, state, county, as well as the city's the city's trust fund. The other mechanism that provides for credit towards the obligation is what's known as the mandatory set-aside ordinance. This is exactly what it means, is that if there are 11 or more than 11 units of multifamily housing in a redevelopment area or via a use variance from the zoning board, there is a 10% requirement of affordable housing to be set aside for low and moderate income families. This was adopted in 2012, so it's on the books already for the city, and it's, you know, it's been utilized. But this is a valid mechanism that would provide credit towards that obligation, which we're at this point we don't necessarily account for an actual number. It's just the fact that that ordinance is on the books and is a requirement that 10% of the units be set aside for affordable housing. So a lot of the times when I go through this, people probably are starting to think, okay, well, who lives in affordable housing or who qualifies for affordable housing? Each year, this income limitation or this income chart table is updated, and it's based upon HUD figures. But for 2022, these are the household incomes that would qualify for affordable housing. It will be updated sometime this month, or sorry, sometime in April again, and we'll probably be increasing the household income. But if you, I'm gonna follow the 2-person household column, and you will see on that first row, the median income is $92,519. That's the median income for the region, and this region includes 4 different counties, and there's the surrounding counties, but for the most part, that's what it's based on. It's not necessarily based on income within the city. It's a regional basis. So of that median income, you'll notice that's in a black color. That is not considered affordable housing, but it's used to determine what the affordable housing is for the moderate, low, and very low. Moderate is $74,000 for a 2-person household income. That's 80% of the median. Low income is considered to be $46,000 and below. That's 30%. I'm sorry, that's 50% of the median income. And then very low is $27,756. And below, that's 30% of the median income. So this gives you a sense of who is qualifying for affordable housing with the different households. It does go up to, I think, 9, and there is an actual attachment to I believe it's in the Housing and Fair Share appendix. You will see the incomes that go all the way up to a 9-person household. So what does that mean as it equates to rents in this region? For a 2-bedroom, and I'll just focus on that, a 2-bedroom, you'll see it ranges from $1,090 to $1,430. That range really depends on the very low side to the moderate side. So a very low household would be able to potentially afford $1,000 unit rent, and then up to about $1,400 for a moderate income household. So these are just an illustration of the rents. It's not actual rents. There's additional calculations that go into the rents, but this is just gives everybody a general idea of the types of rents that people that would move into a low and moderate income unit that they can afford. Some of the other items that, and I think I talked a little bit about them, but I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware, what is an affordable housing unit and what are the requirements? One is that, as I indicated, affordability controls are placed on them. It is a minimum of 30 years that those affordability controls are placed. It's usually through a deed restriction, which basically means that for 30 years, that unit will be available to a low and moderate income household. And when I say it's a minimum of 30 years, at that 30-year mark, the municipality would have to make a decision. It's the governing body as to whether they want to lift those affordability controls or keep them on those units. As I said, the length of controls is a minimum of 30 years. There is a requirement in the distribution of bedrooms as well as incomes. There has to be 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, a certain mix of them, and it has to be an income distribution. You can't have all moderate income folks in a particular development. They have to be split between very low, low, and moderate. So there are very specific requirements as to what qualifies for affordable housing as it relates to bedroom and income distribution. The other items are items that are in the housing element and fair share plan. Affirmative marketing is a requirement, meaning that every unit that comes up for rent or for sale has to go through an affirmative marketing process. And that process is that actually in the city, there's a residency preference for city residents. But it is, if there are several applicants for a particular unit, it does go through a lottery type of process. There is a trust fund and a spending plan. The trust fund is funded through development fees, and those development fees are charged on market rate residential as well as non-residential development within the city. You can charge 1.5% of the assessed value for residential and 2.5% of the assessed value for non-residential. That money goes into the trust fund. That trust fund continues to gain that income, and then that income is spent in particular areas, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that spending plan, which will be adopted by the governing body, identifies where they believe the money is coming from and how much over the next couple of years, and where that money is going to be allocated to be spent. There will be yearly monitoring, not only by the court, but also and submitted to the court, but also Fair Share Housing, as a party to the settlement agreement, will also be required to see the monitoring information. And cost generation is just really this idea that in inclusionary developments, you cannot ask for things that you would ask for above and beyond what's required in the ordinance. And that's really just to make sure that the market rate units can certainly subsidize the affordable housing units. This is a summary of the spending plan that will be going to the governing body next month for approval. And generally, you'll see the top line is revenues, the bottom line is, or the bottom section is expenditures. We anticipate that over the next couple of years, there's a balance in the trust fund already. We believe that about $1 million are going to come in over the next couple of years. We do gain interest because it's in a bank account. So we believe that the projected balance will be $1.9 million by July 2025. It is somewhat of a crystal ball. We kind of base the development fee. What we think is coming in is based upon history of what's come in or anything that we know that's been approved. And so that's why the monitoring on a yearly basis will look at the spending plan and update that as necessary, or make adjustments as necessary. We have to account for all that $1.9 million. And what you will see here under expenditures is to where that money is being allocated. As I indicated in the beginning, the rehabilitation program, $600,000 will go towards that. As I indicated, it's a first come, first served basis. There is a requirement that about 1/3 of what comes into the spending plan or into the trust fund, it has to go towards what's known as affordability assistance. There is an affordability assistance manual, and that is generally it's for existing low and moderate income house units that are deed restricted, and it's to help them through hard times. It's to help folks with even down payment assistance if somebody lost their job, help with rent, But the affordability assistance is meant to go towards existing low and moderate income housing, and it's exactly that, to make them more affordable. That is a requirement. The 354,000 is going towards new construction, and what that typically means, or it does mean, is that it goes to the 100%, as I had indicated before, the 100% affordable housing projects that need subsidy other than for market rate units, because they don't have any. So the city is dedicating about 350,000 towards those 100% projects. And then 381,000, 20% of the trust fund can go towards administration. So as you can see, we end up with a remaining balance of 0, and that's what it's supposed to look like. So that we have a balance sheet that works. That we're not spending more than we need to, but we've allocated for all the money that we believe is coming into the trust fund. So next steps are the approval process. What has already happened is that the planning board adopted this housing element and fair share plan on February 7th. The city council is scheduled to endorse the plan, adopt the spending plan, and some other manuals that I talked about on April 3rd. We will submit the full complement of the housing element and fair share plan and all of the manuals and all the resolutions by May of 2023 this year. And then we anticipate that a court approval will be coming soon after that, what's called a final judgment of repose. And as I indicated, that would be valid until July of 2025, which will end the 3rd round and begin the 4th round. And that's all I have. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody's time and focus.
Thank you, Kendra. That's a really great presentation. I don't know if anyone's hands have raised. I don't see any hands raised. But even if you don't have a question you want to ask, if you want to submit a question in writing, you can submit it to Director Brown at cbrown@hobokennj.gov. You can submit it to me at pcohen@hobokennj.gov. We will be sure to answer all of your questions. And it's very important that this process move forward in a way that will allow us to get our fair share plan certified by the New Jersey Supreme Court. So, Director, I guess I'll turn it over to you to wrap up.
No, thanks, Councilman. Actually, I see a hand up from Cheryl Fallick. I'm going to allow Cheryl to talk now.
Great.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. I guess they're for Kendra. But if not, I guess somebody else can answer, Director. So I saw almost 400K in administration fees. It sounds awfully high. Does that have to be line itemed? I mean, it almost looks like more than the money for construction.
So it's a 20% maximum. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to meet the maximum, but it's almost like you're allocating that to sit aside for administration. If over the next couple of years, as you monitor the spending plan each year, and you notice that you're at 10%, let's say, for administrative costs, the city can make the decision to take that and put it to other parts of the plan that they feel would make sense.
It's
So
almost
you're just
like
putting it. Go ahead, Chris.
well, it's almost like with our CDBG funds. If we get $1 million from the government, from HUD every year, and so 15%, a minimum, a max of 15% goes to public services. And then a max of 20% can go into admin. So when we have a spreadsheet, and we're trying to figure out how we're funding programs and projects, we always account for, okay, well, starting point is 20% administrative. What's our administrative budget? And then we kind of work backwards from that. We never hit 20%. We're always at something like 8, 9, 7. But just knowing by statute how much, and I think that's what Kendra's getting at with the budget.
So would that be funding the cities? But like, is it staff? Like when I think of administration, what is it?
It could. I mean, it could fund, for example, I think CGP&H. It could fund, or our administrative agent. It could fund we're going to have someone in house that's managing the home improvement program. It
Okay,
could
I see.
fund, yeah, you know, we haven't really gotten there yet, but you know, exactly where it would go.
There are
But
places it appropriately can go, is what I'm hearing.
yeah,
Yeah.
it wouldn't go to like buying a copier for the third floor, for example. I
No.
think that might be what you're getting. No, it would go to something
I
that's
and I
different
wasn't
related.
accusing. I wasn't. I was just curious. Okay, Kendra, when the line item in there for the affordable assistance, it sounded like that had to be for specifically affordable housing project. Would that be among the inclusionary, you know, the stuff that's within this plan and
Yes.
only there?
Yep.
Okay, so the people who live in the 10% inclusionary, if they ran into a rough spot, if we set up a program, they could perhaps get assistance through this.
That's correct. They would apply, and as I said, there's a manual that step by step. What are the programs that are available? How do you apply for them? And then, you know, all the steps on the administration side is how it goes through the process for approval.
Okay, and then in our, I guess, the plan, which was like, we're not required to actually have any, which is ironic since Hoboken's becoming so expensive, but because we're an urban aid, I understand. There's so many that's rehab, but it sounds like we do have this small rehab program, but mostly it's towards like developments that are coming down the pike. And then we got credit for some that are in existence now, or not existence now, but approved now.
Actually, the existing projects that you have that are occupied currently and that have met the requirements of deed restrictions and that type of thing, yes, you get credit for that. And it's not unusual. A rehab program is, like I said, a first come first served basis. So it's not necessarily something that we can say, oh, we know this number of units are going to go towards that obligation. We estimate what we think is going to happen, and if somebody takes advantage of it, great. But we don't get penalized, let's say, at the end of the round to say, well, you had an obligation of X, but you only provided, Y.
And the rehab program is only, again, for these inclusionary, these things that are part of the fair share plan.
They're right. They're units that are either existing or coming online that will be part of an inclusionary project, 100% project, could be existing already. Folks that have that already have that deed restriction, they've already qualified, but yet, like you said, they've run into a rough spot, or they're having difficulty getting a down payment, and that would obviously be for sale units, but for rental payments, first month rent, that type of thing.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the rehab program with the loans. Is that also only for these designated units in the plan?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, the rehab program is for existing units. It could also be for proposed units. So, for instance, if I am a landlord and I have a one-bedroom apartment that I rent out, but I know that low and moderate income households typically rent this apartment out, and I need my electrical upgraded because of whatever code issue, I can go through the process of qualifying and receiving a minimum of $10,000 to upgrade that electrical, provided that the person that comes and rents my home or rents that apartment meets the the income qualifications, and then a 10-year deed restriction is placed on that. So it could be existing units that aren't necessarily have a deed restriction on that currently that can qualify for the rehab program.
So any units in town?
Yes.
I
apologize. I mixed it up with your affordability assistance question.
But must they still be designated affordable even if they're not part of the plan, or can they be traditional rentals?
They would be traditional rentals, but a deed restriction would be placed on it, and the income qualification the person would have to go through the income qualification process.
Okay, and then a couple more questions. It's not a problem that one of the existing housing that's on there is men only, that there's no, I mean,
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, and I think this question is for the director. 11 below, I heard that was dead, but that's still showing in here on this plan. the senior thing? I heard we couldn't,
No, we're still trying to figure it out.
okay, so we're trying to figure it out, but it may never happen. But that doesn't really cause a problem because we have more, even if it never happens.
It's not that it will never
It's-
happen, it's that we were having difficulty coming up with the financing to make it feasible. And that we haven't given up on that. We're continuing to work on that.
Okay, I'm just not gonna hold my breath. That's all right. All right, I think, let me just see if I have anything else that I wrote down here. So, yeah, I just have one final question, Kendra, just to help me understand. So we actually, because we're an urban aid, we actually don't have or didn't have ever have any requirement for a fair share plan. Is that correct? Just by virtue of being urban aid?
You didn't have a new construction obligation. There's always been a rehab obligation out there, and so you know that's always been part
case.
of what's known as the obligation. Yes.
And it's, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like, I guess I got a little confused when you were talking about early on the growth, anticipated growth versus it. I mean, is our fair share rehab based on growth?
No.
Okay,
No, the growth share requirements were really meant for new construction. So as a town grew, your affordable housing obligation grew, and those were invalidated. The rehab obligation is actually really is based on census data for the most part.
and your final fair share doesn't take into account loss. It's like, it's just population based, because we're losing affordable housing tremendous, like here, but that's
Yeah.
not part of the equation.
Yeah, not for rehab. For new construction, demolitions are considered in the overall methodology. And we could talk offline to go through what that methodology is. But that's not
Applicable to
necessarily-
Hoboken.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, okay. I
Correct. Yep.
think that's everything. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl. Any other questions from attendees?
Hearing none.
Oh, nope, we
Oh,
got it.
Manuel Rivera Soler. The hand is raised.
All right, Manny.
Floor is yours, Manny.
Yes, good evening, everyone, director, councilman, and fair housing presenters. I want to ask a question. I came in a little late. I was at another meeting, but would like to know this presentation, because I caught it a little late again, is the same one that was presented to the planning board a
Yes.
couple of weeks ago? Okay, all right, because I did attend that one, so I guess my questions may have been asked then, but just briefly here, I just heard the previous speaker, you said that Hoboken is exempt. I may have heard that incorrectly in regards to new projects when you're and demolitions, because as far as I know, there's a lot of new projects and demolitions happening in Hoboken. Can you give me just a little, because I may have not remember that one, can you give me just a quick synopsis to members of the public so we can just understand how that works?
Sure. So we were referring to something known as the new construction obligation, which the city does not have. And the question was really, does the rehab obligation include a review of demolitions? And that's not necessarily the case. Rehab obligation is based upon census data. The new construction obligation, which the city does not have, there's not that requirement of an obligation. Demolitions come into the methodology of figuring out that obligation for new construction. That's the only reason why we talked about that.
Okay, so the city of Hoboken does not have any type of obligation in regards to the demolition in that case, is what you're saying.
To the new construction obligation, which
construction.
includes a methodology that may look at demolitions, yes.
Okay, okay, that was my question, because I know that I asked others and I have those notes. So I appreciate you answering this question. Thank you very much. And from what I caught from the presentation, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Director, and everyone. Once again, have a good evening.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Manny. Appreciate it. All right, so I think that's about it. And so, Kendra, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation, detailed, insightful. It's really got a lot of really important information, and the council will be taking a vote on have the housing element fair share plan, spending plan, and a couple of other important resolutions that support our declaratory judgment process and intent to start a housing improvement program here in the city. So that's really appreciated. And thank you all for your time tonight. With that, we will close out the meeting. And thank you all for, and thank you also for the council members who are also in attendance. I see Councilman Cohen, Councilman Russo, Councilman Doyle. So thank you all for attending, and everyone have a great night.
Good night, Chris.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good night.